I feel like we can't leave day 2 without covering the matchup between Magnus Carlsen and Viswanathan Anand. Magnus Carlsen took the World Championship title away from Anand. He defended it against Anand, and then he defended it again against Karjakin. And before that, Anand had won the title. So between them, we have, you know, the last world champion for at least a decade. So this is a marquee matchup. And even though Fedoshev is leading the tournament, I believe one of these two will challenge for the title. There are 5 rounds left tomorrow on day 3. Anand is half a point behind the leader and Carlsen is only a point behind the leader. But the result in this game might matter in the final standings. Carlsen had white and Anand had black. In most of the games in the tournament, you've seen Carlsen open with e4, but he went with d4 in this game against Anand. And we had the Nimzo Indian defense c4, e6, and c3, bishop to b4. Carlsen went with e3, which is just as good as any move. Queen c2 is the Capablanca variation. Plenty of ways to play it, but he goes with e3, which is fairly common. Bishop to d3, d5, a3. Black took on c3, and in many openings after you've played the bishop to d3, then it's the cue for black to take on c4 to make white spend 2 moves with the bishop. That's what black did. And now c5, breaking a little bit in the center. Development from white, queen to c7. This is more or less a standard move in these positions. And then black will usually play b6, and then either bishop to b7 or bishop to a6 to exchange that bishop. Carlsen retreated to e2. It is also possible to retreat to a2, which is actually more popular. But you had to retreat the bishop because the queen on c7 was threatening c takes d4 and capturing the bishop. So bishop e2 takes care of that. b6 from Anand. Bishop to b2. Bishop to b7. The other option, as you mentioned, was bishop a6 to exchange the bishop. But Anand goes with bishop to b7. Very logical. Castles by white and knight b to d7. One of the appealing points of the Nimzo is that the black development is kind of natural. You just fianchetto the bishop. The knights come out here naturally, and with queen c7 your rooks are connected. Only downside is, of course, white does have the bishop pair, but black's position is very solid. Here Carlsen goes with c4, rook a to c8, and rook c1. Of course, with c4, white is willing to take on the hanging pawns if black were to take on d4, and white to recapture with e pawn. And those positions are dynamically interesting, but for now that didn't happen in this game. Rook f to d8 by Anand, lining up against the queen, so naturally Carlsen puts the queen out of harm's way. But now there's an interesting moment in the game. The idea of the Nimzo Indian, and quite often the Queen's Indian as well, is that you give up the black squared bishop, you play bishop b4 and you take on c3. And the idea with that is that you get rid of a knight on c3, which is a protector of the e4 square. So we can think of the Nimzo Indian as quite often an opening that wants to control the e4 square. So a very natural move often is to play the knight into d4. You have a bishop already on b7 covering the square. But before doing that, Anand plays knight to g4. Now this is a very forcing move. because if you play, well, I don't know if we should call it a beginner move, but a less experienced player might play h3 here, but then you run into bishop takes f3, and you can't take back on f3 because of the mate on h2. So h3 is a blunder here, and therefore, because of this threat of bishop takes f3 and queen takes on h2, you have to play g3. So that's what Carlsen did, and now Anand went back. So why did he lose this time? Why force the move g3? Well, one of your main assets in this position is the bishop on b7, and by forcing the g3 move, you force the weakening of this diagonal, and lo and behold, this might become very important in the game. Hint, it will be important in the game. So let's see what happened. Rook after d1. Now knight to e4. Carlsen went with knight to e1, which looks a bit weird, but he must be thinking about both rerouting the knight somehow and, you know, keeping some options open of challenging this diagonal. You know, you can put the bishop on f3, you can play f3 yourself if needed. Not right now, but those are the options at some point. Anand went with knight to d6, and now d5 from Carlsen. This unleashes the bishop and gives white a, for now, protected passed pawn. Anand took, recapture from Carlsen, and c4. So this is logical from black. I mean, he's lined up here on the c file, you know, with both the queen and the rook and the knight, and he does have a majority on the queen side, so it makes sense to try to start pushing the pawns on the queen side. Queen c2, and now b5, pushing the pawns on the queen side. This could be a long-term plan for black in the endgame, to push these pawns, play a5, b4, and get a passed pawn. Now Carlsen tries to make sense of this knight on e1, plays knight to g2. Clearly this knight is going to f4 to support the pawn on d5. Knight comes to c5. And yeah, this position is kind of dynamically balanced. White does have the bishop here. I mean, this bishop is really strong. But these blockading knights are quite nice for Anand. And white must be careful about this pawn not becoming weak. So knight f4 prevents that for now, protecting the pawn. Queen to e7. Bishop comes into g4. Black must move the rook. But it's not necessarily bad, because later he will play f5, and then the rook on the 7th is actually quite useful. Moving to d7. Queen c3 threatening mate, but Anand prevents that with the aforementioned f5, which also protects g7. So the bishop retreats, and now doubling the rooks. So now we see what we talked about earlier. This could become a weakness later. And it seems that, yeah, Anand is doing quite well here. Position is probably around equal, but I think I might actually prefer the black position here. Now queen b4 was played by Carlsen, and now knight to b3. It seems to me that, okay, white can play rook c2 here, and again we should have, you know, dynamically equal position. But Carlsen went with knight d6, trying to invite some complications. Anand accepted. He took on c1. Now white recaptured. Note that he can't take on d8 because of the Zwischenzug knight to a2. And since white can't immediately attack this knight, he's going to have some problems. We can take this knight, and while white is regaining this knight, we can, for instance, play knight e4 and win this pawn on d5, and black will have a good position. So after knight takes c1, rook takes c1 was played. So Carlsen is down the exchange, but he's threatening to win it back, and this threat on g7 is actually quite important. Excuse me, knight to c8. Dynamic defense from Anand. If you now take on g7, you can't really do that because I take on b4, and then I take on g7, and I'm just winning. The other option is taking on e7, but then I take with a knight, and now you must kind of take on d8. If you take on g7, you're already down some material, and I take on d5. So that's not enough for white. And if you were to take on d8, I simply take back, and now this is falling, and black will be up a pawn most likely. So Carlsen instead went with queen takes a b5, and black has a choice here. Should we save the exchange with rook e8? No. Then knight takes g7, and white has an overwhelming position. A monster bishop here on the long diagonal. Active knight, just good pieces all around, weak pawn, etc, etc. So Anand takes on d5 instead, giving back the exchange. And after bishop takes, rook takes, there's queen b4, and like I highlighted, black now has a monster light squared bishop, aided by the earlier weakening of this diagonal with g3 move, which was forced by Anand. So now what to do? Do we play queen takes e6? No, that gives up our main trump, the bishop on b7. We don't want to do that. We must keep this bishop. So therefore, we see knight d6 by Anand. And now the critical moment in the game. Carlsen should have played knight to f4, attacking the knight, keeping control of g2. And we have dynamically equal position, but to be honest, I would be worried still about this long diagonal, and I think I would prefer black. Instead, Carlsen blundered horribly. He played knight c5. And now Anand has a winning continuation. Let's get the actual board color. He has a winning continuation, and he didn't miss it. I think Carlsen might have missed one detail in his calculations. He must have thought and dismissed a mating attack on this diagonal. The winning move for Anand here is rook takes c5, which he played. Now queen takes c5 is forced, and queen e4. Now I think in his calculations, Carlsen might have dismissed this and thought, you know, whenever he lands up here, I will simply play king f1 and it's not mate. However, it's not that easy. And Carlsen resigned here. And the reason is, if he plays the, what I think is and was the planned move, king f1, there is queen h1 check, king e2 forced, bishop to f3 check, your only move is king d2, and now knight d4 with a royal forkalicious fork. Forkaroni, I will have pizza with a fork. What to do? Only move, and now queen takes c1 check, and after all this business, black will be up a piece. And that's obviously completely losing, which explains why Carlsen resigned. So a great win for Anand, and like we already mentioned, he's in joint second place. But Carlsen is not far behind, he's in joint fifth place, only 1 point behind the leaders, and I think we will have a feast tomorrow. It will be very exciting, and I can't wait to see it. See you guys tomorrow.